Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining today's event. We're just getting started here. Give us just a minute and we will kickstart. All right, as participants are trickling in, I just wanted to greet everyone again. Thank you for joining today's event. Today is the first day of December. Who would believe it? We're at the end of the year. I am Farhana Mahbub, board member for Women in Leadership Foundation, and my day job is at RBC Capital Markets. I wanted to thank everyone who joined and donated at the Canadian Mental Health Association York and Simcoe branch. This organization has served close to 20,000 clients and delivered on the vision of mental health care for all. So thank you for those who helped drive that agenda forward with your kind donations. I'd like to introduce to you Maya Kennigan, a phenomenal leader who I've had the privilege to partner up with and drive some of the Women in Leadership Foundation agenda for the last 3 years, and also call a dear friend. So introducing to you, the audience, the founder and CEO of Women in Leadership Foundation. Over to you, Maya.
Thank you so much, Farhana. Welcome, everyone, and thank you all for being here. I'm Maya Kennigan, the president and founder of the Women in Leadership Foundation. Women in Leadership is committed to creating a platform to promote diverse, equitable, and inclusive workplaces. Our head office operations is located within the traditional and unceded territory of the Syilx Okanagan people. We recognize, honor, and respect the presence of all Indigenous people, past, present, and future. Women in Leadership was founded in 2001 and is an accessible and supportive community advancing women's leadership. Over the past 21 years, WIL has played a pivotal role in helping thousands of women surge to success on their own terms and within a community of support. We have grown to become the largest community of women professionals across Canada, with a talented, dedicated team of 50+ staff and volunteers and 7 chapters across Canada, all working together to make a positive difference. And now over to David Ojenka, founder, Freshstarthub.
All right, thank you so much for this opportunity, and for everyone listening today, I want to say congratulations to you. Why do I say that? The reason why I say that is because you're taking time out to invest in yourself. And if you think with me for a couple of seconds now, when 2 people are taking a walk together, something unconsciously happens. One person would adjust to the pace of the other person, right? So you have decided to be a part of today's event because you want to take a walk with these leaders who you'll be learning from today. And one thing I can tell you is that when you take this walk with them, you would adjust to their pace because they have been where you want to be, and they are also thriving in their respective fields. So I want to say congratulations to you once again, because Jim Rohn said you'll be the same person today in 5 years now from today, except for 2 things: the people you surround yourself with and the book you read. So I want to say congratulations for surrounding yourself with this amazing people. Now, to Freshstarthub. Freshstarthub is a platform that is dedicated to helping internationally trained talents navigate their career journey faster. And we've been on this journey for about 2 years now, and we've been able to help about 100 people to land well-paying jobs at organizations like RBC, Sobeys, Apotex, KPMG, CIBC, TMX, and several others. So I want to say thank you once again, and thank you so much to the Women in Leadership for the opportunity to be a part of this great event. Thank you.
Okay, great. Thank you to all of our speakers, and I think we'll kick off the event. I'm Samantha Nagratnam. I am from PwC. I'm a senior manager here. I am your co-host with Ivy, who I'll let do her introduction.
Thank you, Samantha. This is Ivy Sun. I'm from RBC. I'm a regional director leading the commercial market team. So happy to have all the speakers here and all the participants today.
Thank you, Ivy. So I have the pleasure of introducing Heather. Heather is the founder and president of Stark Coaching. She's an experienced executive coach and organizational development consultant with a focus on leadership, communication, and culture. Heather works with executives to help them navigate transitions to move themselves and their organization forward. She's an experienced facilitator of innovation and strategy workshops and helping leaders to improve their communication. Prior to establishing her coaching business, she was on the senior leadership team of a change management firm working with companies to enhance decision-making, develop stronger leaderships, and foster inclusive cultures. Heather received a master's of business administration from Harvard Business School and is a certified professional coach. Today, Heather will speak on the ways that individuals can face pressures head-on and use their authentic voice for an impact and action. She'll also share her framework for authenticity in the workplace. I'll hand it over to you, Heather.
Hi, thank you very much. Good morning, good afternoon, depending on where you are. Thank you very much for the warm welcome, Samantha. I really appreciate that. And thank you for having me as part of this important conversation. I'm so glad to hear that donations from this event are going to such an important cause like mental health. This is such a great way to kick off December. And like Mahana said, it's very hard to believe that we're actually in December, although it was snowing yesterday. So whenever I'm asked, how to improve leadership presence or executive presence, I always say that it starts at a very basic level, that leadership that brings out the best in others really starts with you. And the starting point for all these conversations around how I can communicate better, how I can face pressure better, how I can be more of myself in situations, it all begins at the starting point of having that self-awareness and self-knowledge and understanding you, how you want to be seen, how you want to be heard, how you want to share yourself and really show up in the organization. And so in order to lead others, you really need to lead from within and have that understanding of your true and genuine self. I often quote Brené Brown because I love her, authenticity is a daily practice of letting go of who we're supposed to be and embracing who we actually are. And I think that this is a really important point for us to live with, that everything that I'll be talking about today and most likely with the other panelists, these are things that we're in a moment of time right now, but these are things that are a continuous process of learning and developing with each other. And as David said, this is a great opportunity for us to be taking time right now to learn with and from each other. And so when I talk about, what is an authentic voice, because that's what I'm going to be honing in a little bit today, it's about knowing who you are at a pretty deep level, and then how you want to interact with the world. And really, it's not a simple thing, like a lot of us can name what our strengths are and our weaknesses are, but there's layers of learning and experiences, including our failures, that have impacted us both, sort of external and internal things that go into, who we are and how we show up in situations. And really, I'd like to talk a little bit today about, going from kind of fitting in to how we think others want us to be, to discovering and using what our true voice is. And some of us are already doing this to a large extent, but like I said, it's a continuous learning journey. So even if you've already done a lot of work in this area, there's always the opportunity to, it's goal setting time for a lot of organizations. So while goals are being set for at the organizational level and how your team is going to move forward or how you're going to move forward, taking that time to really explore who you are and how you want to continue to show up and share who you are. And, because, getting kind of introspective like this and spending a bit of time on ourselves is sometimes kind of a difficult situation, A, to make the time for ourselves, and B, just to spend that time and energy and be present with who we actually are. I've developed a bit of a framework that I use, and you'll hear me saying these things throughout, because I feel like it's kind of good to have a few anchors to go to when you're thinking about things. So the basic premise of this is that to know and use your authentic voice with impact, you want to really know yourself. You want to figure out how you want to show yourself and make a plan for that. And then how you're going to share yourself, how much you're going to share of yourself, and how you're going to help others as well as yourself. And there are many different elements, but hopefully between now and the question period, we'll touch on most of them. And so when I start with knowing yourself, we each have what I call a unique culture. We talk a lot about the culture of organizations. We don't really talk as much about our individual culture, but we do. We have values, we have priorities, we have beliefs that live within us, that shape our decisions, that help us move forward. And I'm sure most of you, have probably done a strengths assessment or some sort of profile through work at some point or another to have an idea of what your strengths and weaknesses are. So at a basic level, we often, know at least what our strengths and weaknesses are. Maybe you're learning about our values still and continually shaping our priorities. And beyond those factors, there's something that I like to talk a lot about with leadership, and that's what energizes and de-energizes you. And, sometimes, what we name as a strength is actually something that's very energizing for us. And when we're living in a place where we're doing things that are energizing for us, we're actually more effective. We're able to share of ourselves more freely, and we're able to, lead others. And it can be a little bit more contagious how we move forward. When we're doing things on a daily basis that are very de-energizing, like if you asked me to plan all day long, come 10 a.m., I would think it was 5 p.m. And so, knowing what energizes us, what de-energizes us is a really important factor in ourselves, because it also helps us understand how we want to surround ourselves with people, who is going to be the support that helps us, who's going to do the things that are less energizing for us, what are we going to delegate, how are we going to do more of or less of things. And, also having an understanding of how we charge ourselves. Are we internal chargers or external chargers? Are we introverts or extroverts? A lot of us actually fit somewhere in the middle as an ambivert. And an interesting thing that I found, and what really reinforces for me why it's important to continually reevaluate and continually look at yourself, is through the pandemic. A lot of extroverts said, I feel like I've always been a person that recharged, by being around people, but had to find ways to recharge by myself. So now I've got kind of a different way of recharging than I did before. And so, continually, evaluating is a really important part of knowing how you can show up and be your best self. And there's also this thing called imprints, which somebody that the founder of cultural research that I worked with, Gary Nuttall, talks about. And those are the things that lie deep, deep within you. And it's really hard to shape those things, but they do impact us, and we need to be aware of them. And as we learn more about them, noting them and seeing how they impact us in terms of our beliefs about ourselves, beliefs about the world, and how they limit us or help us move forward with natural aptitudes or things that'll be a little bit more challenging. And once you've taken some time to explore yourself and have, what some might call more heightened self-awareness, I think it's really important to take that time and sort of think about what are the things that you want to play up more. What do you want to be known for? Set some goals around that. Maybe, and you don't have to change everything or identify everything all at one time, because that can be really overwhelming. Maybe pick one strength that you want to do more of, or one weakness that you want to do less of this year, or some action that you want to take during the year to continue to grow as a leader. And use that as you're, starting to think about how you're going to show yourself. And when I start talking about showing yourself, which is, sort of the second aspect of this framework, it's still being done in parallel because we're continually learning. And I actually suggest that people journal or something to continue to keep track of the learnings that they have. But as you're moving forward to how you're going to show yourself, I think of that as kind of a plan. Like, what's your action plan for yourself? How do you want to show up in the world? what are the ways that, you speak the best? What are the ways that you communicate the best? Are you a writer? Are you somebody that likes to spend a lot of time, liking things on LinkedIn? Or are you a person that really likes one-on-one conversations with people and really shines in that area? Having an understanding of what the vehicle is to share yourself is important. Obviously, we don't always have a choice in the vehicle, but really having that, as a way and thinking about that really helps you. And using that self-awareness to think about what are the things that energize and de-energize you can really go into the plan about how you want to show yourself and setting that up. And so if you've done an inventory of your strengths and weaknesses, and you've chosen a strength, for example, that you want to do, or if you've thought about a limitation that you want to overcome, this year, think about how you're going to use that to show up. And as you're, moving through this process, also be thinking about what are the ways that you're going to energize yourself? What are the things that you're going to do to keep yourself focused and moving forward? And there are things that I call traps that can kind of sometimes get in our way as we're trying to show up as ourselves. I could spend probably an hour just talking about each one of these traps. These traps can, end up in blind spots. They can, kind of really get in our way. But a few that I'm really going to share with you in particular are the busyness trap, the shoulding trap, the imposter syndrome, and perfectionism. And another thing that can get in our way that we have less control over is, the environment that we're in. And so when we're, if I take the busyness trap, for example, what a lot of us do, and it happens a lot to women, it also happens to men as well, but kind of proving your self-worth in the organization by how busy you are. How are you? I'm great. Oh, I'm crazy busy. Yeah, me too. And it's a conversation we have all had probably, and you almost get a pat in the back for being crazy busy. But what happens when we're crazy busy and kind of wearing that busy badge is we don't have the time to stop and reflect on what are those things that help us shine, what we want to be. What are the things we're saying yes to? What are the things we're saying no to? So spending some time and really getting clear around what are your yeses and what are your nos, so that you don't have to apologize when you say no, but you have a clear reason why. And it's not just about being busy. And that's not how you're gaining your currency in the organization. You're gaining your currency by being able to focus in and shine on things that make you you. And, this is also a piece, that kind of leads into shoulding, where when we're taking a break, when we're not busy, when we're not doing what we think we're supposed to do, when we're just kind of sitting down and, relaxing and watching a TV show instead of doing the work, or instead of looking after a kid, or whatever it is that we think we should be doing, or what we think somebody else thinks we should be doing. Stop shoulding all over yourself, because when you do that, it takes up energy, it takes up space, and it takes away from the ability for you to be you. And it also leads into this kind of negative talk that can be part of, what's known by many of us, as the imposter syndrome. And, I think at some point or another, all of us may or may not have felt like we weren't good enough for something, or measured ourselves versus somebody else, or had some negative self-talk for ourselves. And that can really get in our way. And it can be really a trap that stops us from, having the momentum and the movement that we need. And perfectionism, a lot of us that are perfectionists really, that shoulding and the imposter syndrome and perfectionism, I call it this beautiful trifecta of limitation that kind of feeds off of itself. And when you say things enough, sometimes they can be true. So really being aware if you're going down that path. And when you're down that path, it's really hard to pull yourself out. So doing things like preparing, anchors for yourself in advance, reminding yourself in advance of this, what you're really good at, what your strengths are, what you can do, so that when you're talking about what you can't do, maybe you have a little sticky on your screen saying, you are awesome, or you're a great speaker, to remind you that you can pull yourself out. And maybe, accountability with other people to help pull you out of this, so that you don't get stuck into a pattern that makes it difficult for you to move forward. And of course, in order for us to, show up and share ourselves, the environment can also be a different, can make an impact on us. And starting to show more of yourself and share more of yourself, it's, often easier in an environment that is supportive of it and where there's an alignment. And that's part of sharing yourself. And, that third part of this framework is around deciding what is it that you want to share of yourself? How do you want to share of yourself? What are the things? How do you want to dress? How do you want to speak? What's the tone that you want to use? There's all different pieces around how you share yourself. And there are ways to share yourself, from being a mentor to being a sponsor to helping with kind of a virtuous circle of reinforcing what you're good at and reinforcing what others are good at and lifting each other up. But of course, when you're sharing yourself, context is important. And sometimes it's more challenging than other times. And, sometimes, a lot of us will say we kind of have a work persona and a home persona, with the metaphorical shedding of our work day by taking off our work clothes and getting into our comfy home clothes. And so, when I think about that and, that context and how it can impact you, I've actually had some conversations with Prahanna about this, over the years. And, whether it's actually even, possible to, to be, yourself in the organization. And I've had a little permission from her to ask her this question, because this is a difficult question for a lot of people, is, do you feel like it's actually possible, and are you able to show up as you, in the organization that you're at?
Thank you, Heather. I'm truly energized by the dialogue and the conversation. So it was a great presentation. So to answer your question, the short answer is yes, but I'll caveat that. And, I also want to bring in the fact that I very much resonated with what you said. Over the years, throughout my career, I realized that I'm an extrovert. And unlike a lot of people, I actually gain energy from talking to people. So if you put me up in a role that requires me to talk to people all day, I am super energized. And then the second part of the puzzle that you had mentioned is really being able to bring your holistic self, right? And that's really important. And the reason I caveat my answer is because for the longest time, I was not able to bring my authentic self. Always tried to fit in the roles that I was provided, because I felt like that was the best thing to do. And also just throughout the years, I realized that there were roles that was de-energizing me and I wasn't a great fit for. And so I started to kind of think through what does that authentic self mean? One other point I want to sort of tap into that Heather mentioned is that the reason I say yes today is because I believe I am in the right type of organization and in the right type of team to be able to be comfortable to bring in my authentic self. And I feel like I have the right infrastructure that supports it. So that's really a key element to it. I just want to kind of call out that I am a Muslim, and for the longest time, I felt like I didn't want to disclose that fact because I feared that I would be stereotyped. So my question to you, Heather, is how would you encourage somebody today to bring in their roots, their holistic self, their value system, and be that authentic self, as you call it, when they fear that it may actually weaken their brand and their persona?
That's a really great point, Prahanna, and thank you very much for sharing of yourself, because it takes a certain amount of vulnerability to be able to share of yourself really authentically, and that does actually build connections with people when they see that side of you. And a lot of people wonder, if I share myself, is this a CLM? Is this a career limiting move? Have I put myself into a box? Have I made myself unmarketable? There really is only one you, and you have these unique talents that you can share with people, and they're only going to be shared if you decide that you're going to share them. That whole piece around, people talk a lot about psychological safety and the feeling, of being able to share of yourself. It's really important to have a good match with the organization and feel like there's an alignment around values and the ability to actually share who you are, because if you don't feel safe to share who you are, it might be difficult. And, I think that, to be honest with you, we are all in many different roles. You know, we're a parent, we're a child, we're a friend, we're a colleague. And in each of those roles, there's probably, you know, elements of ourselves that are moving through that are similar, and the sameness of ourselves and consistent of ourselves. But in each of those roles, there's a different strength. There's something different that gets played up. You know, you wouldn't talk to your parent the same way maybe as you would talk to a colleague. And so we are continuously shaping ourselves because, you know, we're not in a bubble. We are, you know, constantly, you know, bumping up against other people with individual unique cultures. And so there's a constant shaping of who we are. And, you know, the whole idea of, you know, feeling like, you know, a square peg in a round hole, you know, when you just feel like nobody looks like me, nobody sounds like me, I don't have a model, you know, to even start thinking about what's next for me. That can feel really tough. But we're always taking, if we take that square peg analogy, there always is a little bit of shaving of the edges, you know, to kind of soften our edges in some ways, or to sort of match a little bit with, you know, the people that we're with in that moment. That's constantly going on. But I think when you get to a point where you actually have to shave all of the edges off that square peg to make it into a round peg to fit in the hole, that's a real challenge, because then you've shaved off the piece that's unique and very beautiful about you as a human being. So, you know, being aware of that, and, you know, talking to others and having some accountability partners around this, especially as you're, you know, trying to find what is your right voice and your right role in the work environment is very, very important. And so I think, you know, just, you know, sometimes just having a visual like that, and if you feel like, okay, like one corner is a little rounded, that's okay. That's how, you know, I work with this team. But keeping that in mind and kind of taking a pulse from time to time about how you're feeling and how altered you feel. And, you know, to be, you know, when at the end of the day, if you feel really tired, there's a very good chance that you've been pretending or not being who you are all day, because being in a space that's not you can take a lot of energy out of you. And so I really do encourage, you know, a dialogue with others, having, you know, a time for yourself where you set aside reflection, you know, to think about how you want to continue to grow, because how you know, learn about yourself, know yourself, how you decide that you're going to show up, and how you share yourself with people, you can create this beautiful virtual circle of continuing to grow. But you need to be continuing to think about that and finding time for yourself, and really appreciating that time for yourself to learn and grow, so that then you can share that with others. And so I'm really, you know, looking forward to, you know, hearing what the other panelists have to say on this matter.
Thank you, Heather. I actually wanted to add one more thing before we move on to Ivy and introducing our next panelist. Is I think I would encourage all of the leaders to try and bring their authentic self, because at this juncture of my career, I realize it's your responsibility to pave the way for the next generation of leaders who are and give a voice to the people who are still finding their own. So when you're able to do that, it gives courage to the other leaders as well. I just wanted to add that point as well. So I'm going to turn it over to Ivy to introduce our next guest. Thank you, Heather.
Welcome.
Thank you, Heather, and thank you for Hannah. It's really my privilege and honor to introduce our next speaker, Cecilia Lui. Cecilia is the founder and director of ILIA Connect, who brings over 30 years of experience from Canada and Asia Pacific, working for multinationals across multiple disciplines. Cecilia's current work across consulting, coaching, training, and teaching in cross-cultural communication, inclusive leadership, intercultural competence, and inclusion, supports professionals and organizations on understanding, adapting, and connecting across differences for collaborations and professional success. She also teaches for McMaster University, is an advisory council member of the Institute of Aging in Ontario, and a member of the National Association of American Asian Professional Speaker Bureau. As the SDG Global Ambassador, Cecilia advocates the importance of communication and its impact on our health and well-being. Today, Cecilia will shine a light on the importance of the misalignment between our words and our actions. She will also share her work in intercultural competence and why it's a crucial 21st century skill we all need to understand and develop, especially in our current landscape of diversity and inclusion across North America. So without further ado, over to you, Cecilia. Sorry, you're on mute.
God. Thank you, Ivy, for the introduction and for Women in Leadership and Freshstarthub for hosting today's event, and for everyone for your interest to be here. I want to particularly thank Fahana and Elsie for giving me opportunities to collaborate with WIL on different occasions, allowing me to share my experience and knowledge with a diverse pool of professional women and gentlemen in the audience. I chose to talk about inclusiveness as a key leadership quality today. It's both timely in our current environment and also as a way to introduce my work on intercultural competence as an important skill for us to focus on, especially post-pandemic and since the many recent social issues, not only for our own career progression, but also to bring awareness to something subtle we sometimes overlook in our busy lives and daily interactions with others. I'm speaking to professionals here today, but this also applies to our younger generations, our future leaders, whether they're at elementary school age or high school and university. The younger we expose our children on understanding how to play a role in a more just and fair society, the more hope there is for a better future. I just became a grandmother, and I've been tasked by my daughter and son-in-law with the job of cultural education to my newborn granddaughter, and I look forward to that journey. The way we communicate and express ourselves, whether it's verbally or non-verbally, absolutely speaks volume about our ability to influence and lead. And both are all about, are you someone I can trust and want to aspire to? Are you someone who means what you say and you say what you mean? Does your talk match your walk? Not only as a leader, but as a professional, whether you're in senior management or you're just starting out in your career, or even as a parent or a partner at home. When people don't listen or cooperate, part of the reasons could be they're watching our behavior rather than simply following our directives. And somehow, somewhere, they don't match up. Executive presence, it's more about our titles at work, the brands we wear, or our charisma at an event. It's also about our ability to be present during a conversation or at a meeting, and how we show up for our colleagues, the team we work with or lead. It's also not about not only applicable at work, or sometimes we only switch on when we need it, or when we're with our colleagues or at a presentation. It's the way we carry ourselves, how we show up for others, especially in challenging times. Our ability to be present rather than being distracted or multitasking, to be mindful of our own and the emotions of those around us, being empathetic, considerate, or making others feel welcome and included in conversations, inviting others for their thoughts and ideas, not ignoring their existence, whether it's someone in the room or someone on the email circulation. My work in intercultural competence is more than just educating others on specific cultures. It's more about understanding what we ourselves bring to the table and learning to adapt our approaches across differences. I say differences because oftentimes it's not just cultural differences we're dealing with. Personality is often a bigger monster when working with diverse stakeholders or leading your team. There are also subcultures, school of training, for example, business sectors, and many others. Understanding a little bit about someone's culture and their professional background absolutely helps, especially with the diversity of talents around us nowadays, or if you're someone new in an organization or you just relocated to a new country. It's always wise to understand a workplace culture or the customs and traditions of a new country. In the case of Asian cultures, many local customs and traditions do play into business decisions. In observing the unwritten rules in an organization or society, so we can decide how we want to conduct ourselves, it's always wise. But simply learning about certain cultures, say in Canada, won't solve a current challenge on diversity and inclusion. By becoming a better communicator with others, strangers and all, being mindful of the way we express ourselves and also in the way we interact with others, respectfully, being culturally sensitive through inquisitive questions, which is often what gets us into trouble. It's a good start. Sharing yourselves, learning about others, asking questions from a place of curiosity to engage and connect rather than coming across as interrogation to avoid putting others on the defense. Our intentions in our communication absolutely matters. When someone feels your sincerity in genuinely wanting to get to know them better, they would naturally want to be engaged and want to share more. It goes both ways. The model of work in intercultural competence I wanted to share with everyone today highlights 5 dimensions. Unfortunately, I would have liked to share a slide, but due to, to avoid tech issues, I'm going to do this verbally. The first 2 dimensions are basically learning the basic knowledge and information on the skills acquisition are important, anytime you learn something new. But the supporting elements are equally, if not more important, ability to develop the awareness, to observe our own behavior and also being able to identify the same in others. That's also important. An important motto of mine, it's awareness is half the solution to a problem. The other half is deciding what you want to do about what we're aware of. We all bring our own cultural conditioning to situations, and sometimes our values, our beliefs, and our approaches get in our way of thinking and being. At times, they may also be biased. So having the awareness to understand that that's happening internally and work on managing or removing our biases, assumptions, stereotypes, and judgment, over time, it's crucial. And that's the 4th dimension, our attitudes. The last dimension is attributes. If we have the skills and awareness, and we've managed to remove all those internal noises, but without attributes, such as what Samantha talked about, authenticity, or empathy, seeing things from someone else's perspective, or a willingness to understand, and the sincerity to connect with someone with patience and respect are all important attributes in practicing inclusion. The golden rule still applies: treat others how you like to be treated, regardless of what had happened or how others have treated you in the past. Unless we're at home behind closed doors, everything we say and do is public presentation. Developing the awareness to observe our own behavior and also our words is a high-level skill that, unless we do this every day, all the skills and knowledge we acquire won't matter. If we have the skills but don't practice our empathy or refuse to understand someone by interrupting them or shutting them down, that just won't cut it. There's a lot of talk about finding workplaces where we can feel a sense of belongingness, but belongingness is somewhat subjective. What makes you feel belong may not make me feel belong. We all have different needs, but we can certainly take note of the things that make others feel excluded and remind us not to go there. To name a few, purposely excluding someone from conversations or bypassing them for ideas or input at meetings, playing favorites, whether you're a leader or a parent, being judgmental in our comments, being sarcastic, using jokes, making assumptions about someone's behavior or a certain culture, or it's simply not playing fair. These are just a handful of the common things that we sometimes knowingly or unknowingly do. When it comes to influence as a professional, not just a leader, because every person has the ability to influence, it comes back to who we are as a person, how you treat others, and how you convey yourself through your communication. Influence in communication is also about playing to the preference of the person you want to solicit buy-in from. Do they prefer emails or phone calls, in-person meetings, or do they prefer long over short emails, text over emails? Whether this is your boss or your potential client, learning to read people and observe their styles and preferences will save you a lot of headaches and frustrations. In summary, I would say the most powerful way to influence someone is leading by example. Do you display the inclusive qualities that others consider to be fair and just? Are you someone who is open-minded to all types of diversity and not just ones you prefer? Will you follow someone like yourself? Thank you. I'll pass everything back to you, Ivy or David. I think David has a question.
Yes, thank you so much for this presentation. But you spoke about the fact that reading the room, understanding the audience, and also making sure that you're not cutting into people during conversation. I remembered a couple of years ago as a newcomer to Canada, and I joined the bank, and I remembered after 2 weeks, my manager, I had my one-on-one with my manager, and she said, David, you don't bring your ideas to the table, and you don't speak up during conversations. And for me, because I noticed that people speak over other people, and for my own culture and my upbringing, I wanted to make sure that everybody have finished talking, but by the time I check the meeting time, it's over, right? It's already gone, right? So how do I, as an immigrant, make sure that I'm being seen as a thought leader, and I'm also contributing and bringing my ideas to the table and communicating and speaking up in meetings? How do I do that such that it doesn't impact my credibility, my brand, and also my capability in the workplace, and also doing it respectfully?
As an extreme introvert decades ago, I have also learned that over time, learning to speak up, learning to, because oftentimes, especially, I think we need to be, self-understanding is an important element in personal and leadership development. Understand yourself, understand what gets in your way, whether it's developing your visibility at the meeting table or in your organization. Yeah, those are some of the things that we need to push ourselves out of our discomfort. I remember as a young person, oftentimes I have ideas and inputs, but fear of being judged or ridiculed by others. Nowadays, as a trainer and an educator, I encourage the students, no question is a stupid question. You just need to ask it, because it might be the same question that other people have. So I think it's something internally we need to work on, our communication skills. First of all, within ourselves, learn to muster up some courage to voice our ideas and our input. You may have one mistake coming out of a meeting. You may say to yourself, oh my gosh, I just asked the most silly questions, or observing the room, how others, respond to what you asked. If you're open, then you learn from that experience and learn to do it better next time. So I think I would say practice, don't give up, and understand that it's something that you can overcome. That internal courage to yourself is important. Learn to strategically think about what it is that you want to ask before a meeting. Go through the agenda, have some thoughts, have some ideas in your head. And when the time is right, I think timing is very important. You missed a boat at this meeting. Next time, you promise yourself you're not going to do that. So yeah, I would say not give up, and then practice in lower risk situations. Whether whether it's a volunteer situation or with your colleagues, learn to ask more, learn to express yourself, your ideas, your input. Practice during lower risk situations, and then over time you will have the courage to ask the most important question at a meeting.
Thank you.
I hope that helps.
Yeah, but yeah, it does. But a follow-up question, just quickly, can you share, because you said that you're an introvert, right? But you were an introvert, but you came out of that shell. Can you share a quick story with us about how, a personal experience about how you were able to do that?
It wasn't an overnight thing. It wasn't after a podcast or a webinar, but it's every day show up and putting yourself out there. I think putting yourself out there, whether it's on social media or at a meeting, it's something that you value, then it's something that you need to overcome. I also know people who are introverts, but will rather suffer than to step up to the plate with their public speaking, with their communications. So you decide yourself what's more painful, not being able to convey your ideas, or you want to hide in your own bubble. So that is your own.
I want to add, Cecilia, thank you for those
Farhana.
answers. And David, thank you for that question, because I think it's really valid. Sometimes I also feel the same way because I work in capital markets, and as everyone knows, it's a heavily male-dominated environment. One of the other things I think people might benefit from is to have allies. So over time in my careers, I found that having that open and transparent conversation with my manager, with other female leaders, with men who are allies, talking to them to saying, I have difficulty expressing these ideas, and if I do express these ideas, make sure you back me up in that meeting, right? And that gives you that courage to keep going forward. I think that's really critical as well, because sometimes depending on the environment you work on, if you make that first mistake, you may not get at the seat at the table the second time around, right? So it's important to be able to demonstrate that strong voice in the first time around, and having those supporters around you to make sure that you have courage to go in again. Just wanted to add that.
Thanks, Farhana.
Perfect. So with that, let me turn it over to Sam to introduce our third guest.
Yeah, so I have the opportunity of introducing someone who's really important to me. She has helped me with a lot of milestones in my career, and I'd like to introduce you to Samantha Paisley. Samantha is a partner at PwC's leading capital market and asset management consulting. She has experience in capital markets and asset management sector across Toronto, New York, and London. Samantha has led large-scale transformations from G20 regulation reforms, launching new client offerings, organizational designs, and driving strategic technology-enabled change for cost and control. Samantha has a passion for helping others. This can be seen through her work with the Consulting's Parents Initiatives. She's also a sponsor of Women in Capital Markets and the co-sponsor of PwC's Women in Financial Service Network. Samantha has navigated authenticity and inclusiveness throughout her career. Today, she's here to talk about how she sees these methods and frameworks being applied in the organization and across her various roles. Welcome, Samantha.
Thank you. It's great to be here with everyone. So why don't I jump in? I think the question was a little bit around, how do we see this showing up in industry? Authenticity and inclusivity, what's really happening, and how does it show up? So for me, I see it across sort of three ways. First, and I can't help but take it from a cap markets lens, it's what I do, but is from CEO selection, and the second being investor activism, and then global initiatives and policy work connected to things like ESG ratings and targets. And when we think about ESG, authenticity and inclusiveness, it comes and shows up in all of the letters that are ESG, from the basics that are how the organizations reflect the societies that they're operating in, to the North Star of building trust, right? And unless, as leaders in our chosen fields, we're authentic, we can't break through that trust equation. And so one thing for me that was really helpful to think about, the importance of authenticity, inclusivity, is the trustworthiness formula. So I'll pop it into the chat just in case others haven't heard it. But it's this idea of you have to add together credibility, reliability, and intimacy, right? That concept of being vulnerable to be truly authentic. And that idea of, credibility builds with inclusivity and making sure everyone has a seat at the table in the discussion. But all of that is undermined by self-orientation, right? So we really need to be there in terms of an inclusive orientation to think about how the greater good comes together. So for me, that's a key sort of anchor component of why it's so important to bring authenticity and inclusivity to everything that we do. And when we look at what we're seeing in the market, along the likes of the CEO selection, investor activism, what's happening with ESG ratings and targets, is it's not only just a business imperative, and we see that businesses do better in the long run with a more diverse leadership group, but it's also becoming that moral imperative as well. For me, I feel people they vote with their feet, and how does that show up? It's the feet that take them to where they work, the feet that take them to where they live, and the feet that take them to the places they go, where they go and they shop and they spend their time with the people in their lives. So I'll share a personal story for me about how I voted with my feet. About a year and a half ago, I made the really big career decision to make a move and join a competing firm, and now I'm over here at PwC. And I should say, we've got many across the call that are from, I think, all four of the big four. So it's great to see our industry so well represented amongst this group. But one of the things that really spoke to me, because I think all have really fantastic capabilities and brands in the market, but coming into the Canadian market, was a really big change for me. Even though I grew up here, I never worked here. And when I had the opportunity to meet the PwC CEO, who had only been in his seat for a couple of years, and I think this talks to really that CEO selection is how he got that spot. And we were talking about this component of the importance of inclusivity. And as many, when they are past that really important baton to lead a large organization, they really get to make their mark on how they see fit. So the natural tendency is to grab your right hand man, your right hand gal, to help you be successful. But really what spoke to me about how our CEO went about it is not only was he looking for diversity representation, is he shared that he opened all the positions and did psychometric testing because we needed diversity of thought. And I thought, wow, okay, this isn't just, to Cecilia's point, we're not just, talking the talk, we're walking the walk and living our values and making sure we have that fullness of representation in our thinking, and as well as in terms of the different demographics of which we're operating in, which is why now, fast forward to this year when his tenure's been extended, and resetting that overall executive leadership team, we now have gender parity as well, which is a pretty fantastic and remarkable shift. And so when we think about that and we think about how we vote with our feet, if we all did a little bit of self-reflection, and think about why did you accept that job, or why did you go to that school, or why did you move into that team? For me, a lot of my voting with my feet and making those moves is because of the people. I wanted to go and work for that leader. What was it about them, in terms of their authentic style, how they helped me feel included and valued into the goings on of that particular organization, is really where I voted with my time. I invested in their success because I felt they were invested in mine, and believed in the vision that they were building forward. And I think that only comes where you create, again, that sense of intimacy of being vulnerable, and truly authentic about your whole self. It's not easy, right? We have lots of challenges of how we show up, the different versions of ourselves that we were talking about, my work self, my home self, my friend's self. Sometimes they can all be very different personas. So how do you just become that one person? And as Heather said, letting go of who we think we're supposed to be and trying to really embrace who we are. And I think it's important just to think about, what are the different tips and tricks that we can all employ to help us get there. So I'd love to see if people want to pop in the chat if you have any particular questions. But maybe just to start the ball rolling on that, I'll turn back to David's question because I can't help myself to think a little bit more about that one as well, and all the great advice that was shared. Because everything that Cecilia and Farhana resonated with me. I think there's an overarching piece around like what are all those tips and tricks that can help you find those moments, right? So finding an ally, finding a safe space to practice are really fantastic avenues. There's other things that we can think about because sometimes it's not that we don't have the confidence, it's knowing the how, the art of the how, and how did that person amongst all those people starting to talk on top of each other, how did they get their voice heard? And so for me, when I look at a situation like that, there's two main techniques that I think of. One is the meeting before the meeting. That plays a little bit on what Farhana talks about, right? Is how do you connect people before and in a smaller audience, get your points across. So when that debate happens at the bigger meeting, at the real meeting, someone will naturally say, like, oh, well, David, actually, you had a really great thought about that. Why don't you share what you're thinking? So then you get invited into the conversation and you've built that credibility. And so you've created trust with that person who will be your change agent, your sponsor, the pounder of the table in the room for you to open the door for you to give voice. The other piece is the visual cues. And I have to say, I struggled a little bit with this going into the fully remote environment because I'm one of those people where whatever it is, I resonated, David. Like, I don't want to necessarily talk on top of each other, but Farah and I, we're both in cap markets. We're all just chatting a million miles a minute. And what I used to use a lot in like a steering committee or a large executive working group was a visual cue. And I don't have a pen with me because we're so digital now, but people used to do this. You kind of would have these little cues physically in the room. You sort of lean a little bit towards the table. You might have an arm extended. You might kind of do like a pen in your hand, just kind of nod that you have something you want to jump in with. And so the MC of that or the other person that's talking will give pause and then shift their eye contact to you, and the floor is yours. How do you do that virtually? Well, I think there's a couple scenarios here, right? Like we have our whole like digital hand, which I think helps, right? We can pop it up and then so that will give rise that you have something to say, but that can feel quite like you better stop for me because I have really something important to say, and that can feel high pressure. Another way is trying to think through, we was just chatting about this actually like an hour before on a coaching session. It was like, how else do you get that? And some people do, and Sam has this where your monitor is in another screen, but your nice big giant screen is over here. So when the conversation's happening, you're listening, you're watching, whatever, but when you have something important to say, you can create your visual cue and then come back to the monitor. And then you've got your eye contact on the camera. And that's a cue is either she's really caught on to something I've said or she's got something she needs to add. And so those are just different ways that we think about how do we create that space to give voice.
That's really interesting, actually. And just to sort of in the same vein talk about it, I'm probably going to get this wrong. So I'll encourage the audience and the panelists to look it up. There is something called the amplification strategy. I don't know if a lot of you have heard about it. It was during Obama's time that a lot of the women actually adopted to make their voice heard. So, if I would say something, raise my hand and sort of say something, then Samantha would be like, yeah, actually, I agree with Farhana, and somebody else would pipe up and say, then that kind of created this whole amplification strategy and voice in the room. So look it up. I think that might be an interesting study that everybody would find fascinating. So with that, thank you so much, Samantha. That was great. And I actually, in particular, love what you said, that I invested in their success because they believed in mine. I absolutely love that. So that's a great takeaway for me. Ivy, Sam, over to you for the Q&A.
So we'd like to open the floor up for any questions. Dave, I see that your hand is up. I was wondering if that's there for any particular reason.
Nope. He's following Samantha's suggestion.
Ivy, I think you have a question. Why don't we start with yours?
Yeah, as think I can start a question with Cecilia. As I had a chat with Cecilia like before the session, and a lot of great stuff I learned from her. So as just to put what we have heard, what we have learned into practice, like how can we develop and measure the intercultural competence? Because through the process of development, it's like how can we know that we are making progress?
Well, I think the quickest way to take note how develop your skills are is by watching how other people relate to you, whether they're approaching you or they're running away from you. That's a very simple, like if you're on a team, often you find, people come to you for help or with questions. That's a good sign that you are, being approachable, that you are open-minded, and you've created a good team culture for people to come to you asking for help and support. One way, another way that, the opposite is people just stay away from you. They don't, they're not very, they don't want to talk to you, and then they work in silos. But I think and I'm going to put the 5 dimensions in the chat for as a reminder for everyone. The second part of your question is how can we develop? Sorry, what was the second part? Well, as I said, I wanted to share a slide. I'm happy to share it with anybody, but the quick way is just to reiterate the dimensions in the model. So, the basic knowledge, obviously you have to understand, what intercultural competence it's all about. It's not about just understanding cultures, but learning how to connect with other people so that you can build your network, you can build, improve relationship, with your peers. And, I think once you learn it, you can apply, collaborations and whatnot. I would say the most difficult ones to work on are our internal noises, and that's our attitudes, whether it's our biases or stereotypes or judgment. We all have those. I mean, let's be frank. There's no such thing as we're bias free, because we all have an upbringing. We all have cultural conditioning. So we need to develop the awareness to watch over ourselves, what we say, how, even the internal noises in our head. Just because they're in there doesn't mean that it's not going to go out and into our behavior. Awareness, it's something high level that we just have to work on developing. I can vouch for absolutely doable because I've been there, right? 20, 30 years ago, I was, somebody who lacked all of these, and with awareness that the people around you don't particularly have a good relationship with, or the communications, how you relate with ourselves. I think the most important relation, we're being positive, with our internal voice, or we're diminishing, always putting ourselves down. Those are also important, because what we think, we do. And so oftentimes there's a correlation. I hope I answer your question.
Sam, I have a question, but I would rather that we get questions from the audience. Do we have any?
Not at the moment, no.
Okay, so let me ask my question, and that's to maybe Heather first, and then Samantha, Paisley. Essentially, I want to understand, maybe Heather, you can provide kind of in the context of your framework, and Samantha maybe make it more real and tactical. So you always hear of, women. What are some of the things that you feel women do? And I know you talked about the traps, Heather, that get in the way of being seen or heard as a leader. You often hear like, oh, she's a doer, she's a great worker, she's a doer, but she's not thinking strategically. But the fact of the matter is, she might be thinking strategically, but she's too shy or intimidated to bring her ideas forward, right? So maybe Heather first, and then Samantha, you can take a stab at it.
So, how do we kind of get in our own way? Is that what you're trying to get to, is how we get in our own way of, not being a little bit more visible in the
Sure,
organization?
I would say yes, in our own way, but also really demonstrating that you are a thought leader, you are a strategic leader, you're not necessarily a doer to the rest of the organization or rest of your team.
Yeah. And so, I think that, when you're in this point where you're constantly doing, as you said, known as the doer, then you don't have the chance to actually take the moment to decide what are your moments to shine, choosing your impact moments, going back to David's question, even what I call them as impact moments, taking the time to build up your allies beforehand, getting your presence before you're in the meeting, raising your hand metaphorically and actually. If you don't have the time to plan that out, it's not going to happen. But, in addition to that, it's the piece around, taking that leap. How do we actually take the leap? I think Cecilia actually even mentioned that as well, is, sometimes it's just going to be hard. It takes a lot of courage to step out kind of on the ledge and do something that's uncomfortable. And, sometimes showing up in a way that doesn't really feel necessarily like you or the way that you've done it in the past. Takes a bit of courage. And, so if we're the person that always just naturally, hasn't really been driving our own car, I suggest drive your own car. You pick the route, you drive the car, be in the context, you've got a map, you've got roads to follow, but you drive the car. Don't just be the passenger that's along for the ride. And so, for example, if you've got the nicest handwriting, so people always say you should be taking the notes, it's really hard to be the person that has the moment in the room and is participating heavily in the meeting, because you're so busy getting right what other people say versus using your voice in that meeting. So being really aware, planning ahead, choosing impact moments, thinking through how you're going to show up, how you're going to share yourself, and having an action plan around that. And sometimes, maybe you need somebody, to sort of help kind of as you're taking that leap to, be your accountability partner as you're moving forward. But planning out those leaps, planning something energizing around that, to support yourself after you've done something that's particularly taxing, but making that plan for yourself and being really intentional with who you want to be in the organization and driving the car as opposed to sitting in the passenger seat and just going along for the ride.
So this was, yeah, the tactical to that. There's a few thoughts to it. Maybe I'll sort of break it out into two pieces. One is just an observation as we evolve over our careers. This is something one of my mentors shared with me, is that as we start out in our career, sometimes like we're kind of like, we start in, we're pretty quiet, trying to figure out like what's going on. I don't know which ends up and what am I going to say. And then all of a sudden you find your voice. And as you go through those different layers of experience, kind of like when you get through sort of that senior manager or VP level, what you find is that you're always talking. And then when you get into the more elevated roles, like an MD type of role, sort of, area head kind of thing, there's impact moments to Heather's point. So you might say something at the very beginning or the very end of the meeting, because it's the first and last impression are the lasting impressions. And so you find that moment to make your point. And then when you get to the top, you just let everyone else talk and you say, I think let's do what's right for the firm. And that's what you say. So it just depends on the context and finding those moments of high impact. The other piece I think that comes into it is like recognizing what are the techniques to get you there. Like what are you going to say when you first open up your mouth and like out of doer mode of like, here's my work product or here's the report you asked for, is how do you show that moment of thought and opinion. And so recognizing that actually like you are the driver of the car, you have a lot of autonomy. So you can go with like, here's the ask and here's the answer, but I also did this because I think actually we would get to a better outcome. And so here's the other view, right? So you can have those opportunities to make your own stamp on it and still do what's asked and check that box and feel like you've covered this safe ground, but then have the opportunity to say, but then I looked at it another way and actually I found this and this, and I think we should go that way, right? Or say, you asked me to do like these 10 tasks. I did them, but actually I found a better way and I, simplified it. And now it takes, 8 hours instead of 10. Don't feel like you need to be given the permission to go and do something different in a different way, right? It's yours, you own it, you find your best path, and you find the right answer while still getting the job done. And that's a great way to first give voice.
Thanks,
Thank you
Sam.
both.
So Heather, I think we have a question for you. And this one's, how do you balance sharing your authentic self with vulnerability without coming off as weak?
Very good question, especially as a woman, where oftentimes there still is a little bit of legacy around the worry about appearing weak. And, you know, that is something that where it's really important to not only know yourself, but really have an understanding of what the audience is, what is your surrounding, you know, how is that alignment working, and what values are there? Because there are certain things that different organizations or different people will actually think of as weak. And so how do you cue into your environment and adapt to yourself, you know, sort of that shaving of the square, to adapt a little bit to make sure that as you're sharing of yourself, that you are creating the vulnerability. And to Samantha's point around trust, vulnerability, truth, and that piece of authenticity really helps with the connection and the trust. And that helps build and deepen the connections and the relationships within the organization. I would suggest that when you're first trying, and I can't remember if it was Cecilia or if it was Samantha that said it, but when you're first, or if I said it earlier, but when you're first sharing of yourself, you know, even if you're a more senior leader and you are sharing something different of yourself, choose a more safe space to do it. Maybe even test it out with a coach or test it out with a trusted colleague before sharing it at a larger level. So you kind of take the temperature of what you're going to share if you're really feeling not sure about it, because your fear around sharing it can actually come out a little bit in your confidence. And that can actually sometimes make you seem a little bit weak. Because if you're sounding like a question mark when you're saying something as you're testing it out, I think I want to be more authentic. What do you think? And if you're asking a question at the end of it, people are going to see that not as you owning it, but as you questioning yourself as well. So testing it, using your words out loud, whether it's to the mirror, to a colleague, to a friend, before you share it more largely. And maybe also, you know, developing a little bit of allyship before you share something of yourself. But really, you know, knowing yourself, but then how you fit within the context of that organization. And maybe even something that's a trigger that might set you off as you're sharing of yourself in that moment, that might make you look a little bit more, you know, quote unquote, weak. So that you can, you know, really think through it and listen to yourself, play yourself beforehand, get other people to say, Heather sounds like she's finishing her sentences without a question mark at the end and really confident of what she's saying. And sometimes you can say almost, I do a lot of communication, you can say almost anything sometimes. And as long as it's said with confidence, without a question mark at the end of your voice, with a smile and some surety in your voice, it can actually engender confidence of those around you as well.
Yeah, I suppose the other element to it is recognizing that, like, as people, unconscious bias, it's in all of us, right? It's human nature. And so it's okay to worry about that idea that you might come across as weak, because, you know, we all have our own biases, even you as the person raising the concerns. And, you know, how do you open up that dialogue to help create that element of trust and shake out what their biases might be, to make sure you set the record straight, you get on the path that you want to, and just making a space open for them to also ask the questions, right? And tease that information out. Like, the other aspect, I feel, I don't know if others are there yet, but, you know, we've come a really long way, like from when I think of it when I started my career to now. And I think of things like the Me Too movements and other aspects. Like, I am finding there is so much more representation than when I started out of female leaders in the executive levels. And we've got people in from academia, from public service and public sector, and from the corporates on the line. There's, you know, my sense is that that dial has shifted a fair bit. And so we talk about things like having the meeting before the meeting, finding those allies. You'll probably find a lot more allies these days. Like, you won't be the first one that have had to have that conversation. And so, finding those people that can help you give voice, and what were the tips and tricks that they had, how did they resonate it, what were the pitfalls that they had. So as you're approaching this discussion where you might be feeling very vulnerable and exposed, you have a sense of a path of how to navigate that from your allies, and making it a safe space for that person and yourself to say, there's some concerns, there's some risks, there's some biases. Some of those issues will be founded, some are completely not founded. So let's just talk openly about what it all is on the table.
Elsie, your hand's up. I think you're on mute.
I think Elsie has a question to ask, and Elsie, you're on mute.
Oh, okay, I have unmuted myself. So question to Samantha Paisley. So what is the strategy? What are some of the strategies that you can share to our audience about finding allies in the organization? Some women sometimes, not women, some people are very shy. Some also feel like it is very hard to find the allies that basically align with your personality or where you want to go, for example. Can you share some of the tips, Samantha?
Yeah. And especially, we talked about in the last couple of years, it was like the war for talent, right? And so many of us changed employers, myself included. And so that you're probably finding as well that you're joining in like a virtual environment, right? So it can be really not much more of a hurdle to cross to try and find those people, right? That are your allies that you feel you click and resonate with. So I suppose there's a few places to look. And so often many organizations will have sort of different diversity and inclusive networks. And so that can be a way of going about it and participating there. And if they don't have it, make one, right? Like, if there's a void, fill the void, find the solution, be the solution, to help bring people together. And the other aspects I think there are is, not everyone has, like, we talked about extroverts, introverts. What's the environment that feels good for you, and trying to figure out how to flex for that. So, even, if you're on one end of the spectrum of on the introverted side is, most people, especially in an organization, they will take time to meet one-on-one with you. So taking the time, asking for that coffee chat, that virtual coffee chat, trying to get a sense of that sort of sense of like social work dating, and that sense of trying to figure out who's going to become your allies within the organization, and create those sort of networking opportunities. That there is an element too, and I'm a huge believer in the virtual and hybrid working, but being in person and investing a little bit of that time, so you get that sort of meeting before the meeting, the walk in between, the meeting room and where you're sat, those casual collisions that happen in the office. Look for those opportunities as well, just to broadly connect. What you'll find is, as you ask people about themselves, people love talking about themselves. So ask, like, what's your family makeup look like? Do you have siblings? Have you always worked or lived in Canada? Do you have children? Like, what did you do for school, or what do you want to do next? And that, as you start asking people, they usually love to talk and share about themselves, and you'll learn more about them that way. And then you'll figure out what parts click well for you.
Thank you. Back to you, Samantha.
David, I think you have a question.
Yes, I have a question. So, and this is to Samantha. Looking at your career journey, you were in London, UK for 7 years, and then you moved to Canada in 2020 during COVID, I would assume. And you've been able to transition from London, UK to still EY in Canada, and now you're in PwC. For those people who are immigrants on this call, people who may be interested to learn more about your journey, how were you able to make that transition, one? And what would you say helped you to make that happen?
Absolutely. So I would say for people who are looking for international experience, the most secret weapon to that is to work for a global firm. And so the best way to get your ticket into another country is to get an internal transfer, and it comes with a whole lot of expense coverage for how expensive it is to move country. So that always helps. And it also has an opportunity when you work for a firm that's in multiple countries, is the opportunity to work across borders, like even from within your own home country or your host country, depending on where you're physically located. And that gives you a chance to sort of build relationships across those different locations. And then another thing that I often did as well is when I would go on my own personal travels and my own vacation holidays, I would go and stop in at the office, the local office of the company I was working with, and meet with the people that I used to be on working group calls and virtual conference calls with, and build relationships, and then offer to do like, as a junior person, they would say, like, there's this really big topic that's coming out in our market. It's probably going to come to yours. Do you want me to just do like an informal lunch and learn? We can chat about what's happening because it might come to, Singapore or whatever. Those were great ways to build those bridges, and then just an opportunity to build that connectivity. The one thing I think in terms of like actually making it happen on top of being in a place that will help with the ease of it is it's this whole idea of like just putting it out there. So saying like, I love what I'm doing. I love my job. Maybe you don't, maybe you hate it, and that's okay to say too. But you could say, at some point I would love to have the experience working in X, or I'd love to have the experience to do Y, that sort of thing. And so if you just put the ideas out there and you plant the seeds and you have that discussion about what makes you tick, you never know like what next meeting they're going to be in, or what the meeting they were just in, and they're looking for the person that can do that, or the person who's ready to move. And so just really, it's a whole like, is it visualization or just putting out there in the universe? There is a lot of truth to that, because the more people you talk to, it's sort of that 6 degrees of separation. They'll get you towards that opportunity you're trying to get to. So that's been a big piece of it. When I came to Canada, actually, I wasn't going to come back to Canada. I was going to go to Hong Kong. And that's how it came about. As I was speaking with a few mentors, and I said, you know what, my end game is Canada. I'd love to come back home at some point, but I have this opportunity to go to Hong Kong. What do you think? Is that going to have more value or less value than my recent experience in New York and London in the Canadian market? And then that just drove a whole other conversation of like, oh, actually, we're looking at growing out this area that you happen to be an expert in. Why don't I go and have a conversation? Maybe you should come to Canada now and forget about Hong Kong. And that's what happened. So it's just sometimes putting it out there, and having those open conversations and being a little bit vulnerable, because it's a big move to say like, there's a really great job offer, but I don't know if it's the right one for me.
I just want to add, Samantha, those are some really great points. And very recently, I was actually on a panel as well, and I was sharing how if I go to visit a country and I know that the RBC has a location there, I typically drop by and I'll meet some people. It's my opportunity, even though it's a personal travel, I'll do it. And my co-panelist, who is a male, he said, "Oh no, Farhana, I would never do that. And in fact, I encourage you not to ever do that, because this is your time and you shouldn't be doing it, right?" So, but I want to kind of turn back into Heather's point around being your authentic self. And there's no right or wrong way of doing that. That's him being authentic. That's what works for him. For me, my authentic self is to be that connector, is to be putting myself out there, looking for those opportunities, making those connections wherever I can. And that I just want to make sure that, the audience are able to tie these little moments of career opportunities with being authentic, authenticity as well. Anything to add there, Heather, Cecilia?
Yeah, I would say that that's you driving your car, right, Farhana? Like you're deciding like, this is the way I want to show up, and owning it. And in terms of this networking piece, I tend to call it spheres of influence, and where you really try to map out like, who are the people that can help you as you grow as a leader, and who can you conversely help, in this journey, because, it's a two-way street. That's this fantastic thing. And, the more that you think through and actually plot through and be intentional about who you're connecting with and how you're raising people as well as getting people to help support you, is a really important piece of your journey as a leader.
Yeah, I want to add a couple of things. Networking is actually crucial to our career progression. I didn't learn how to network until I relocated to Asia, because back in the days in Canada, there was no such thing. But then after I relocated to Hong Kong, I met more people in a month than I did in a lifetime in Canada. And for some societies, it's a fabric of, business. In Asia, relationships is important. And I think even post-pandemic, we realize how important building our network and building our relationship is. And also to the point of authenticity, being vulnerable. I think there is always power in admitting, however big or small, your mistakes are. As a leader or even a team member, as other people see you step up to admitting where you went wrong, even if it's a minor error, you're actually inviting other people to do the same. Because often, a lot of times, in the workplace, people are timid, or they don't want to show their mistakes or errors for fear of, consequence. But I think there's a lot of power in apologies and admitting your errors. So that's it for me.
So
Back to you, Farhana. Yeah,
questions,
sorry, Samantha.
That's all right. I just want to say I would like to thank everyone for their time, and to echo what David said, you've invested in expanding your network, but also expanding your knowledge. So that has been really, really important today. So thank you everyone for your time. Thank you to our panelists for their time and sharing your experiences and your thoughts. And with that, we will give you 2 minutes back so that you can wrap up and run to your next meeting. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks for your time and energy.
Thank you.